Thank you, and I hope the coffee helps a little bit. So, first, thank you for inviting me here, because it's really important that the next generation, which is you guys, will do things better than us. The era of cancer predisposition is evolving, isn't it? And for me, the issue is not to remember details, so you don't write anything. You just relax and try to think the way we are thinking, and you'll see it's a personal journey of almost 20 years now, and I think personal lessons and lessons that are good for all of us. Nothing to do, I'll use brain tumors, but it's nothing to do with brain tumors. It's how we think, how we make mistakes, and it's actually important. So I'll start with a question. So I do believe, and I need to use this for that, it's so confusing, that there's a yin and yang for cancer genetics and genetics of cancer. You all understand how important is genetics and genomics in cancer management today. But we believe that when you know that, it helps you to trace some of these to the germline. And if you understand more about germline predisposition, it can give you a breadth of knowledge how to treat cancers, actually not only childhood cancers. We can teach adults because the germline is very strong in our patients. So there's a yin and yang, and I'll go back from the yin. So yin will be cancer predisposition, yang will be tumor, just for fun. And I'll go back and forth all the time, if that's okay. So the first question to you guys, let's do it briefly. What's the best way to treat cancer? To win the war against cancer? Maybe I'll help you. The worst way is innovative therapies at relapse 7. Targeted therapy, whatever that's the worst way. So what's the best way? So there is a word for that. So prevention is the best way, isn't it? A lot of our prevention is done by taking organs out in cancer, isn't it? Which is terrible, isn't it? Prevention of breast cancer. But that's the best way to treat cancer. What's the second best? Relates to what you say too. So you had two good answers there.
Catch it early.
Nice. So for that, you need to do surveillance protocols, isn't it? To do surveillance protocols, you need to have early awareness and to know about, yes or no, the risk of cancer. So now you understand, I hope, that we think there's a lot of, how do you call that, underneath the iceberg that we don't know. But we think the best way is to have diagnosis and awareness of the cancer predisposition or cancers, allow early detection and surveillance, allow for interception. Interception is a new concept that we love, actually, and we're starting doing that. I think it's a huge part of what we are doing. We're going to find a low-grade tumor and prevent the high-grade. That's interception. It's not prevention, isn't it? But it's called interception and actually prevention. And we do biologically rational therapies, but I don't think it's the most important thing. Okay, so now another part of the story, here, will be that we are oncologists, this is for oncologists, and we think different than the geneticists. The geneticists look at a patient like this guy, and they see the broad face, and they see that he has multiple lesions, which are basal cell carcinoma, and he has a medulloblastoma, they see Golin syndrome. But we actually look at it very differently. We have this tumor. If it is a glioblastoma, it's for the next hours, what's the differential diagnosis? Which are the cancer predispositions? We look at it the reverse way. And it's important because when you use them, you need to understand that it's different approaches. So here starts my personal story, and some of the old people know the people involved in this story. So what happened, I was a fellow, and we had an amazing family. I told some people here that the father was a doctor, his brother was a doctor, and they came with their beautiful son that was the age of my son. He was, I think, 12 years old. He was a pianist, he was a basketball player, beautiful boy. And that time we fried these people with the St. Jude's protocol and we had 95% survival for these patients. And that amazing human being had a relapse very rapidly, and he died horribly from metastatic relapse, which we couldn't understand. And when we looked more, his mother died at age 37 from a cancer. It's amazing how doctors don't follow things. And at the end of the day, it was breast cancer. So if you go and you do this pedigree, it's very classical: grandmother with AML, mother with breast cancer, and this is autosomal dominance inheritance, and it's the classical appearance of Li-Fraumeni cancer. And we were lucky enough to have David Malkin, who I said invented Li-Fraumeni cancers. He's an amazing colleague. If you have any question, please ask him. He's also my mentor. And the story of P53 started to unravel. So we go back to the Ying, okay? So this was a medulloblastoma kid, okay? But if you have Li-Fraumeni, the question was, can we do something to intercept and early detect the cancers? And David, in 2003, initiated the surveillance protocol, which I was involved in doing it, and it was incredible. All the world leaders told him, you're unethical, you're going to put these families through horrific, horrific phases of anxiety just for nothing, because you're not going to do anything. These patients are going to die anyway. And in 2007, we published, and then Anita Villani, if some of you know her, she became a leader in cancer predisposition, published this cohort. This is our patient, brother and a sister, actually. He had a choroid plexus carcinoma diagnosed late. Then they found it's Li-Fraumeni. He received tons of radiation, chemotherapy. He was dead at arrival, as we call it, isn't it? And then died after multiple complications. And she was screened. We found a small tumor. She never received radiation. She was alive for many years after. So that's the difference if you do surveillance protocol. And what was striking, and I put this old graph before the two papers that were published in Lancet Oncology, because it was amazing. It's 9 families, but something like 40 patients. 16 were surveillance, and the rest were not, isn't it? The same mutations, the same thing. And we'll look at this survival craziness. Actually, there's only one patient who died in this cohort. Li-Fraumeni on surveillance survived many years. So that's the yin, isn't it? Let's go to the yang. The yang was an incredible group of people. Michael Taylor, who is a surgeon, incredible biologist. Cynthia Hawkins, who's a neuropathologist. We don't have Peter today. You need neuropathologist. And Natalia, who was a fellow, and Vijay, who was my colleague, a neuro-oncologist. So we started asking questions. So what does it mean to have P53 mutation? Forget about the germline, isn't it? In the tumor, because nobody thought about it before, in a weird way. Choroid plexus carcinoma. This is true today. 2 weeks ago, multiple studies, multiple protocols. Still, if you have wild-type P53, you're doing amazingly well, even without radiation, actually. And if you have P53 mutations, you're doing terrible. These 2 patients are actually germline Li-Fraumeni that were surveillance. So you know what I'm saying. It's like amazing for me to see that. But the real story was medulloblastoma, isn't it? You just heard about it. It was thought to be not a P53-driven tumor because of a paper in 1991 by the god called Vogelstein, who said that's a rare entity. P53 is not common in medulloblastoma. He was right, but he looked at 11 tumors. So nobody knew about it. We looked at our patient. It was 50 patients. And look at this craziness. Everybody died less than 2 years. So then, this is all amazing stories, and some of you know him. Do you know who is Stefan Fischer? He's one of the gods of pediatric neuro-oncology. At that time, he was a fellow, not a resident in ICU, came to my little office at Sick Kids. I showed him this data about our patient. He said, no, we have to do something. Went to Germany. They did the same, found out. So in their cohort, there was no difference between P53 mutated or not medulloblastoma. What the hell? Stefan, you may have been involved. What was the reasons that in Toronto everybody dies and in Germany it doesn't matter? Guys, think. This is about thinking. They have no Li-Fraumeni syndrome, and it's all about Li-Fraumeni. Because it can be just somatic. It doesn't have to be germline. Good. Very important point. No, so this is nothing to do with Li-Fraumeni. This is the yang. This is mutations in the tumor. Yes. Who said that? Nice. So the Germans know how to treat and we suck. Practically in a different way. The North American protocol are alkylators heavy. We fried these kids with 16 grams of cyclophosphamide, and that's terrible. Maybe it's not good for these tumors. However, the other approach, which was that done in Europe, may be better for medulloblastoma with p53 mutations. Okay? There was another one, maybe it's all biology. Is that okay? So at the same time, about 2 years after, Stefan and Michael found that actually, I'm saying generally, the groups in 3 places found that medulloblastoma is not one entity. It's 4, remember? 4 entities, so maybe it matters. And you see the survival. Some of them, especially if they are blue, Wnt, are doing much better than the rest. So maybe, and I'm keeping the old charts specifically because I love it, isn't it? It's now different. But, okay, so maybe it matters which subgroup you have p53 mutation in. That's what Natalia, who was a fellow like you were before, and she just took a year and did research in the lab. So she collected now data from Germany, Toronto, and many, many other cohorts, and now it was 400 tumors, and she found something striking. Within the first 4 group, it doesn't exist in group 3, 4. Remember we talked about it because we went to the yin, but that's still the yang. We found that it's only in sonic hedgehog and Wnt and not in the rest. I'll skip that because we don't have time, which is important. But you can see actually that if you have a Wnt medulloblastoma, p53 mutation has no meaning. And if you have sonic hedgehog, you're really doing terrible. So now this cures the whole story, and it's since then true in Europe, in North America, and many other centers. So genomics and genetics together are really important, isn't it? So now back to the yin, sorry. So now, years after, what Stefan and Paul Northcott did, which was amazing, look at all the medulloblastoma and said, okay, so what does it mean for the yin? And we discussed it today, so I'll jump on that, but you can see that actually sonic hedgehog, we all need to refer to cancer genetics because they're enriched for many, many syndromes. Wnt, we only need to remember one thing, sequence the beta-catenin. If it's negative, then you need to look for APC. And group 3 and 4, it's really rare. You don't need to do anything. Is that okay? So now we cured the yin and the yang for medulloblastoma. The second story is actually incredible for me clinically. This has nothing to do with biology, but history and clinical. So Annie Wang is my colleague, and she is a world leader in a tumor called Rhabdoid tumor, which you know has to do with cancer genetics too, all right? So here's the story and how we make problems because we don't know what we don't know. So for many years, I would say until around 2000, we didn't call ATRT ATRT. It used to be a part of high-risk medullo. We didn't even know what to say. They looked ugly, large cell anaplastic. Remember the story? So they looked just ugly. But there were posterior fossa tumors in many cases, or PNETs here, and virtually many of them died, if not all. So then came the area of genomics. Genomics started not with what we think genomic is. It started with expression of genes, and they actually took brain tumors in children and found, you see the reds are groups, that medullo is different than glioma, different than PNETs, but also different than rhabdoid tumors, you see? At the same time, we started learning some more with very old-fashioned tools, not the tools we use today, and we found that all of these tumors have a deletion in chromosome 22. There's a gene there called INI1 or SMARCB1, and then we found that it's mutant, and the beauty is when it's mutant, it's not expressed. So now you can look at this. This is a tumor. The blood vessels are staining positive. This is negative. Every place in the world can find that, isn't it? So now we can diagnose ATRT. Protocols were designed. Patients are surviving now. But when we started doing this 2003, nobody really survived, okay? So then here comes a patient that had metastatic ATRT. Even today, metastatic ATRT, we don't know how to cure them well. So this tumor had here, she was 1 year old, and a tumor here. So in the past, we used to call them metastatic. But going to the yin and yang, we thought it's maybe cancer predisposition. So maybe these are 2 tumors, not metastatic, by 2 tumors. If it's 2 tumors, we should take them both out, which we never do in metastatic tumors. So actually, Michael Taylor, because he thinks genetics, took the 2 tumors out. We treated the patient. She was alive. Awesome, doing well. And these are 2 different tumors we know today. Okay? So that's good. Then go back to the yin. Back to you. So what do you want to do? She's alive. She has cancer predisposition of rhabdoid tumors. Surveillance. David Malkin, the king of surveillance, designed surveillance for Li-Fraumeni based on the tumors that they get. At that time, these patients got really ATRT and kidney tumors, isn't it? So what does the surveillance protocol include? MRI of the brain, ultrasound belly, until which age? The 3 questions, isn't it? It's true stories. Until age 5, because everybody developed tumor until age 5. We don't need to surveillance them when they're 50, isn't it? So that's what we did with that patient. She did well. At age 5, we stopped the surveillance, and at age 9, she got this tumor. So now we know that actually they get sarcomas, part of the rhabdoid, remember young syndromes and old, is expanding. So now total body MRI is a part of rhabdoid tumors, and we follow them for years. So we are learning all the time, and we are making mistakes as we learn. Is that okay? So this is the story of her. By the way, she's alive. So the second thing is understanding the pathway means. This is thoughts. This is not learning and memorizing. So here's an amazing story that all of you know, but let me present it in a different way, okay? So what are these? Where are they from? Easter Island. Why am I saying that? For 2 reasons. One, remember the heads in Easter Island? You must read about what happened there, because they found these huge heads and population that could never do. How can they do this? There's no trees there, nothing. How can you move these big heads around? And read about that, how it happened, how human society destroyed themselves, especially in the Trump era. You need to know that. Now, the 2 things I need to tell you is, one, how is Easter Island called in their own language, the natives? Rapa Nui. Remember that word, okay? And the second is, for years, until I think it was 2011, we thought that these guys had only heads, and that's what they used to bow for. But then we dug deep, and we found this. They had full statues, but we just didn't look for that. So sometimes when you learn more and you look more, you find things that you never expected. So this is the story of Rapa Nui. Have you heard about tuberous sclerosis? This is a cancer syndrome that actually most of that has nothing to do with cancer. A small part of them will develop multiple types of cancer. I'll focus on a tumor called SEGA, subependymal giant cell astrocytoma. It's a relatively benign, but they occur in strategic places, can kill you. In the past, we used to do surgery after surgery after surgery with a lot of issues. But the story is that, this is the SEGAs. And the story is this. So this is how biology help each other. So Rapa Nui had a yeast that they cultured that and developed an antibiotic called rapamycin. Have you heard about rapamycin? It's a terrible antibiotic. It never worked. But that drug, rapamycin, is actually been found later to inhibit many pathways in humans, okay? And that's important. This is all basic science in the lab that has nothing to do with cancer. They found that actually it inhibits a gene called, I make it a mistake. So rapamycin was invented after finding a pathway, which we found a gene, which I'll tell you why it's called like that, which actually is inhibited by tuberin 1 and 2, which are the genes which are defected in tuberous sclerosis. The gene is called mTOR. Well, why is it called mTOR? Mammalian target of rapamycin. They found the gene because rapamycin inhibit. Nobody knew what it is, isn't it? So they called it target of rapamycin. Mammalian is us. And now they found the gene. And now we found that the same effect of the drug is done by the normal tuberine 1 and 2. And if this doesn't work, you'll get many tumors. So the idea was, let's replace this with a drug, isn't it? That was done by a neurologist, nothing to do with cancer. He treated, so that's the story, isn't it? That rapamycin. And he treated 6 kids with these SEGAs. They all responded beautifully. And that was not a New England journal. That was in a redundant place. And then when he stopped, what happened? All regrew. Remember, because we can use that information for us today with NTRK fusions. That's the beauty, isn't it? We learn. So all of them recurred, but then he went to the New England and he did a prospective study and showing 28 patients, and it was amazing data. This is a neurologist. They all respond, but now you can't stop therapy, isn't it? So we are giving mTOR inhibitor for life, like HIV. We treat them for life, isn't it? But then we see they get less seizures. We improve their autism. They actually improve their lung lesions that cause death later in life and other tumors. So you treat for life and you learn other things. Sometimes it's horrific side effects, but sometimes it's amazing effects on the patient, on the yin. So that's that story. The third story is not everything that looks the same is the same. No, but listen, there are 2 parts of that. One is the good part and one is the bad part. I think we need to use this to treat NTRK, BRAF, and all of these the same as we treated with mTOR, because we will learn that maybe it will do good things for other reasons. You know what I'm saying? But here is a true story about things that look the same. We can use that to treat patients with cancer, and I'll show you the bad story after that. Okay, so you all know about NF1. I can skip these things to get to the discussion, okay? So they have multiple things. Cancer is, again, a small part of their life, although it's the major cause of death when they're adults. And they get these optic gliomas, as you said. Bilateral optic nerve glioma is actually pathognomonic for NF1. But practically, these are usually benign brain tumors that occur in the optic pathway. So knowing that, for many, many years, I'm oversimplifying a big story that were found by Stefan Fitzer and others. We now know today that it's not only NF1, it's the whole pathway which affecting the same type of tumor, low-grade gliomas. So actually, I would say 90% of low-grade gliomas will be affected by the genes in the pathway. For example, PTPN11, RAS, BRAF, as you know, it's the strongest one, and many other, including NF1. The beauty is that is tyrosine kinase, so we have drugs. Nobody developed drugs for children, they developed for adults, but it works on melanoma and others, so now we can use the drugs, and in our case, it actually works. But you can also use that to start stratifying low-grade gliomas, and you can see that low-grade glioma with the same tumor, similar mutations, look the same, have amazing 30 years survival if you have NF1 or BRAF fusion. So don't radiate them, don't overkill them with surgery, because you do more harm than everything. However, V600E is a shark in a fish tank. It's not that good, isn't it? And K27M, even if they are low-grade gliomas, this is recent, we call them grade 4, they behave like high-grade. But we can use the inhibitors, isn't it? So this is I hate case reports because you start believing them. Don't do that. So you publish it, but be careful. The fact that you found it once does not mean that it's true, but this is a good example. This patient came immediately after the BRAF inhibitors came to the market, and she was a baby, I think that was 1 month old. She was blind. She had this horrific tumor. At that time, we never biopsied, because who cares about biopsy? It's low grade. We treat the same. We gave her chemotherapy. In a month and a half, 1 month after, she was in ICU. These are all tumor cysts, actually. She had huge ascites because she had a shunt, and she had electrolyte abnormality, the hyponatremia they couldn't treat. So she was dying. Then we biopsied it. In less than 5 hours, we did a small PCR, found it at V600E. The company allowed us to give. She was the first baby that got the syrup of the brafenib. And after 1 week, she was outside of ICU. No ascites in 1 week. After 3 weeks, she was outside the hospital. And look at the shrinkage of the tumor. She's now 2015. 8 years after, a normal child in school, vision is awesome. She actually has sarcoidosis, which is a long-term side effects of BRAF, crazy stuff, isn't it? Which we discussed this year. But just to understand the magnitude of that, and you can actually know that it's published, there's a New England Journal paper that's going to be published in a few months, maybe even less, shows they did on relapse tumors, and now they did up front comparing chemotherapy to BRAF inhibitors, and BRAF inhibitors are much better in controlling the tumor. So it's going to be a problem for all of us, isn't it, to get access to the drug, because now the New England said it's better than chemo up front. You can see patients who failed chemo responding well to targeted therapy, but I don't have the time to show it. But the same as SEGAs, if you stop, 85% will recur. The same as you heard in histiocytosis yesterday, remember the graph? The same, because it's the same mechanism. So we can use the fact that dog and humans are the same. Okay, back to the yin, remember? Started with NF1. NF1 patients respond the same. They are good stuff with the MEK inhibitors. But they have this horrific plexiform neurofibromas, isn't it? And when this is 2 papers in the New England Journal, and you can see that even if the tumor has minimal effect, look at the quality of life of that child, which is now doing much better. Okay, I think I'll stop here and ask you the third question. What's the best way to treat cancer? You know the answer. Prevent it. So what will you do if you're a brave non-oncologist, because we are afraid? What would you do now if you knew the amazing responses that we have in low-grade gliomas in NF1 patients? Yes, when? 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 Say that. When? Thank you. So theoretically, no, I'll tell you the future, isn't it? And wait, and my job is to persuade you, isn't it? In cancer predisposition talk. So we do poking of phenylketonuria. Why? Because we want to start early, not to, am I right? So can we add in the poke, we're not poking twice, can we add NF1 testing there today? Yes, we can. We need to prove that it's beneficial. Maybe we can prevent low-grade gliomas. Yes, we can. This is a mouse work, so what can you do? You have to be brave to start in humans. We start in mice. Mice that have NF1 will get, this is a normal optic nerve. You can see the tumor cells growing very fast. That's the model, okay? If we take these mice, which are NF1, and we give the mom trametinib, through the milk, it goes to them for 3 weeks. Not for the whole life. For 3 weeks, which is about half a year of childhood life. They never develop tumors. So that was 2014. Story, Stefan. What did we do since then? Nothing. So there is, what I'm saying, there is things to do. We are afraid that all the teeth will fall or they'll never grow their, I don't know, ears in the future. It's side effects that we don't know. But there is a future and possible prevention of all their tumors based on multiple modeling that suggests this is a developmental tumor. Okay, so just FYI. So the last story is the last, I think it's the last that took my life, and everybody knows I don't have a life because of that. And that's actually amazing group again. A cancer geneticist, a gastroenterologist, Eric Buffet, who is my mentor and friend of many of you, amazing person, Cynthia, the neuropathologist. And we looked actually at patients with NF1. And that is actually the second thing, yes, that not everything is the same, and be careful. So it started with, we have rounds with Pakistan, Jordan, and many countries in South Asia and the Middle East, and they all presented patients with NF1 who had multiple café spots, and instead of having optic glioma, had glioblastoma, or had leukemia, and almost all of them died. And we struggled, so we did a study at Toronto, and long story short, we found that actually they have a different cancer syndrome. We just made a mistake for many years, because not everything that looks the same is the same. They do have café spots. Now we have data on 200 kids, which I can show you today. They do have, the 15% will fulfill the NF1 criteria with freckling and plexiforms and stuff, but they are tall, They are not intellectually challenged. They have consanguinity, not always, as you know, and they are a different syndrome, and the syndrome is, which we called initially biallelic, now it's called constitutional mismatch repair deficiency. But actually, this is, again, the tip of the iceberg. The majority is under the iceberg. So if you have heterozygous mutation, any of the mismatch repair genes, you called Lynch syndrome and develop colon cancers and genitourinary cancer when you're 50. I'm oversimplifying life. Is that okay? If you have this syndrome, I don't think I have the new version, then you get the most aggressive cancer syndrome in human. We have data on these 200 patients, 500 tumors. Think how many tumors per patient. We know they get cancer every 2 years. We thought they get hematopoietic malignancies, colon cancers, and brain tumors. But actually, they get all types of cancers. We now have survivors who get breast cancer at age 20, prostate cancer at age 25. They get all types of cancers, including sarcomas. Okay. But the mechanism, please don't be afraid. It's good. It's actually simpler than, as we said, anthracycline subtypes. It's actually one mechanism. So when a cell wants to replicate, it has to multiply the DNA by 2, isn't it? That's done by one enzyme, DNA polymerase, which makes millions, not 1,000, millions of mistakes for one cell cycle. Millions of mutations. It's repaired by only 2 mechanisms, the proofreading domain of DNA polymerase and the 4 mismatch repair genes. So if these or these don't work, you get crazy mutations and you get microsatellite instability. So if you have 10 repeats of A's, it becomes 8 or 12. It's called instabilities, okay? And there are many in the genome. I'll show you why it matters. So remember, we want to do that. We don't want only to treat. We want to do other things which matter more. We actually know today that CMRD that everybody hears about, we talked so much about, it's actually rare. Lynch is way more common. Polymerase, we have no idea, but we see it in medulloblastoma and glioblastoma now. So just to understand, it's there. To do this, as you guys know, we need to form a consortium. We have actually more than 50 countries, many participants from low and middle income countries and others. And we offer free genetic testing, and we have a team. It's not Toronto. It's a team of experts for lymphoma, for solid tumors, and surgeons, and it's an amazing thing. We have like 5 to 10 consults a week. So here are things we're learning, okay? So first, it's about 5% in developing countries, which we never thought about, isn't it? Because we never screened for that. But in Jordan, it's 50%. So 50% of glioblastomas in that country will be mismatch repair deficient. They should be treated differently. We'll discuss it later why, maybe. I'll wait for the next session. There is a reason. Okay, so this first point, if you want to generate excitement, nobody cares about a rare syndrome. But the question, is that cancer mechanism common or uncommon in adult and pediatric cancer, isn't it? So the yang, we found the yin. What about mismatch repair deficiency or replication repair, both components in cancers? So we gave our life to Foundation Medicine. We taught them how to do the tumor mutational burden, and you can see it on the report. They earned millions of dollars based on our algorithm. But back, we got 80,000 tumors to see how common it is. And we found that it's not here, 20% of adult cancers are hypermutant, mismatch repair deficient, and we just miss them. So we can treat them differently. But in children, it's 5% up front and 15% at relapse. And actually, the beauty is that brain tumors are very common, but you can see that you are missing Wilms tumors, you're missing sarcomas, we are missing many cancers just because we don't look. So then we said, okay, how do we diagnose it cheaply so we can do it in Pakistan and everywhere, including Princess Maxima, that we are doing it now with them. So we invented a tool that I'll show you the steps because it's so cool. So it's based on microsatellite instability. Remember that 10 becomes 8 or become 12. Remember? So here is the story, the history of that. So actually, when you look at the whole TCGA data, the Human Genome Project, they looked at 5 microsatellites in the genome, and that's how they stratified as MSI high or MSI low. Satellite instability or not, okay? 5 microsatellites. We looked at our patients. They should have crazy MSI in their every cell because they have zero ability to repair mistakes. All of them were normal. In brain tumors, only like 14% had MSI, 5 loci. So we said, okay, let's look at exome because maybe it's not enough. So exome has 300,000, not 200. So now you see that these tumors have extremely high microsatellite instability, actually much more than adult cancers, which is very cool, isn't it? So now it becomes a relevant tool. 300,000, this is done with the Broad Institute. This is Yossi Maruvka, this is Brian, my man. So he's now becoming a doctor, good for us. And then this is only exome. What happens in genome? Genome has 23 million microsatellites. So now you can do 2 things. First, you can see that it's not a random thing. It's not just low and high. If you have mismatch repair deficiency, this is the size of the microsatellites. This, if it goes down, is deletion. This is insertion. It's actually only deletions, and polymerase will cause insertions. So now you can divide all human cancers into 4 groups, isn't it? You can say mismatch repair proficient cancers, mismatch repair deficient only, polymerase only, or both, isn't it? But you don't need 23 million for that. You can use 50,000 for that. So you don't need to sequence the whole genome 30 times. You can do 1 time. You can use it on paraffin. You don't need control of normal. It costs $100, less than fish and shmish and everything we do in every lab in the world. You can actually, it's so good that it beats all other sequencing. This is the Toronto Sequencing Center, called KICS, very famous. They missed 4 out of 70. These were sarcomas and other tumors that were actually thought to be NF1 and were actually Lynch syndrome patients that we missed them because we looked at mutations and other things. So this is an amazing tool, very cheap to use. So what can we do with that? It's much better. It's 100% sensitive and specific, better than all other tools, including immunohistochemistry, mutational burden, and I told you the old MSI. It's so good that you can look at blood, and you can see that if you have CMRD, you'll have extremely high normal cells versus all the control groups of cancer predisposition and stuff. It's so good you can do it on saliva. So now we are diagnosing CMRD in developing world by sending us saliva, and you diagnose that for free because it costs only $100. So the real story, though, what can we do with such a tool which can be done in many samples at the same time and clinically relevant, and it's actually going to be clinical soon. Here's the beautiful story, which I can't show you, but I'll talk about. So now we can screen 192 samples in one time. So we said, okay, let's look at all gliomas in Ontario. We looked at 2,000 gliomas, age 0 to 40, and we used the tool to say if they are mismatch repair deficient or not. So all of these are mismatch repair deficient, and all of these are not. And data is maturing now. I just showed you the abstract, isn't it? It's incredible. So we didn't know that. And we used the validation cohorts from St. Jude's and CBTN, which is a big North American centers. 5% of all gliomas in 0 to 40 will be mismatch repair deficient. The minority are CMRD. We just looked at little here because we love it. It's actually much more interesting. So tumors like BRAF fused tumors or other tumors will never have mismatch repair deficiency. So you can narrow it to a subgroup that it will be 20% mismatch repair deficiency just by simple elimination that can be done in every centers in the world because you can use immunohistochemistry. The cool thing about that is that as opposed to most of yin and yangs, if you find it in the tumor, it's 97% going to be germline. If you find P53, remember I told you before, in the tumor in brain, it's only 2% germline, very rare. But if you find a patient with mismatch repair deficient glioma at age 25, call the parents too, because they are probably harboring mutations. So it's a crazy thing you can do with a simple tool. And that's the story. You can see Lynch is way more common. It expands to age 29 mean with older patients. So remember, the second best way is early detection. So this is back to the yin, CMRD. We built a protocol in 2008. implemented it for 10 years around the world, and so what happened, it's a very aggressive protocol, but it shows you for the first time that patients with glioblastomas, if you find glioblastoma early, you can cure them. This is crazy stuff which I never believed in. But it's way more interesting. So you can do surveillance in Pakistan, you can do surveillance in Taiwan, you can do surveillance in many places, not as well as in Europe, but look at that. Partial surveillance, just by awareness and doing some of the tests, you improve survival dramatically for these patients. So even partial surveillance. And now we are working on ctDNA, because what we can do is improve this to find it much earlier just by circulating tumor DNA. You know how we're going to do it, with logic, isn't it? But I forgot to tell you that in the cohort here, these are all CMRD patients, but you have patients with extremely high MSI and patients with lower, isn't it? They're all still mismatch repair deficient, but they're different, isn't it? So maybe the ones who have a very high will develop cancer at younger age, and ones who are low will develop later in life. This is exactly what happens. So if you have, you still have CMRD, but you have below this number, you'll develop your first cancer at age 20. So you don't need to surveillance everybody. You can choose the patient you surveillance just by the logic tool, which is quantifiable, which is very cool. So now back to the interesting story. The worst way to treat patients is at relapse, remember? But we can still treat them. This is an amazing story. So again, we found this is mutations per megabase, so millions of mutations per exome. And you can see that our tumors in orange have 1,000 times more mutations than all other childhood, not twice, 1,000 times more mutation than childhood cancers, actually higher than all adult cancers. So we hypothesized that maybe tumors like melanoma and lung cancer, which have less and responded to immune checkpoint inhibitors, our patients will respond. Just to understand, the melanoma trials show that over 100 mutations per megabase, total per exome, will respond. Our tumors have 20,000 to 50,000 per exome, so it's much higher. And remember, we don't know, but it can be patients with Wilms, with liver tumors, with many other tumors that we are just missing because we don't find them. So this was summarized. Last year, again, the amazing Eric Buffet, our clinical trials, Daniel Morgensen, and Aniban, who will hopefully replace me soon because he's much brighter. And now this is patient with relapsed tumors, including glioblastomas, failing chemotherapy, and they got immunotherapy, and 50% are alive at 3 years. That's versus 0 in 2 months. We, for the first time, see objective responses. This is tumors disappearing in front of our eyes, which is amazing. Relates to surgery. Somebody asked me yesterday. We'll discuss it maybe in the afternoon, the role of surgery. Go ahead.
Do they all die of the tumor, or do they have trouble with myositis or other side effects?
So you're talking about side effects of immunotherapy. So that's actually a very cool question. Let me just finish this and get back to you. Maybe I'll say it now. So again, I said to some people that I said yesterday, my previous boss, Eric Buffet, has balls of fire. We started this treatment, and the second patient had metastatic glioblastoma, and day 3 went to ICU with seizures. When they did MRI, the whole brain and spine highlighted, and most people will give steroids and bye-bye. He said, you don't do anything, you wait, because it's maybe immune response. In 3 weeks, the patient was out, no evidence of tumor. So it's incredible. It's nice. Now we have 130 patients we treated, so we know it's called flare, and we know how to, but initially it's crazy. I was afraid, because I talk here like I'm a very frightened person. I was afraid that the immunotherapy will attack their own body, isn't it? So strikingly, they have much less side effects than adults, autoimmune side effects, and I think it's because their body has less, to activate the immune system, you need tissues which are suffering, older tissues with issues, so children are less than adults. But when you start doing combination at relapse, then, and I don't talk about it today, then you see significant autoimmunity. In CMRD and not in Lynch, because the Lynch don't have any issues with their cells, remember? Okay, But now you can start enjoying life and say, okay, can we use biomarkers, immune and genomics, to see whether we can improve the outcome? So if you look at them, these patients here, which have favorable ultra-happy mutations, specific mutations, and immune microenvironment markers, they have 90% survival at relapse after failing radiation and chemotherapy. So what's the next step, guys? Yes. And what do you give up front? Who talked? Radiation, chemotherapy, and immunotherapy, or? Sorry, I'm leading you. Why not immunotherapy alone? It has 90% response after relapse. Why do we need to give them radiation and chemotherapy, isn't it? So this is 2 patients. By now we have 5 who got immunotherapy only, so good biomarkers, and they're alive several years after. And this is an international clinical trial we are running with Jordan, Egypt, Turkey, India, Australia, and Canada. And the plan is to give upfront immunotherapy with no radiation. That'll be incredible, isn't it? It's like medulloblastoma without radiation. Before I go there, I didn't tell you, and that's the slide I'm missing. They get 2 tumors at the same time in 25% of cases. So that's why when you see a patient like that, you need to do a PET scan before you start therapy, because you may hit a lymphoma that we are missing. And strikingly, they do respond to immunotherapy, even if they have 2 tumors. It's published 2 years ago. It's really beautiful to see metastatic colon cancer and a brain tumors responding, because it's a holistic approach to the cancer mechanism. So to summarize, functional genomic tools, I think, are the future, not just regular genomic tools to help us determine cancer mechanisms and early detection. We can improve survival by surveillance. Don't forget to do this boring thing, because it's more important. And I think maybe immune approaches can be stratified to other cancers. This is a Palestinian child who is a good friend of us from Haifa, actually, who is now like 8 years, metastatic colon cancer, alive and well. This is my annoying patient. So again, he went to the adults, and now he refused to come I'm cured. This is the patient that Eric saved, okay? They're allowing me to talk about them. But now he goes to the adults, he says, I'm not gonna come to do surveillance, who cares? So it's really interesting, the problems that we have. Camille is an amazing 31-year-old guy that during COVID sent us pictures because he said, I don't have any life, so maybe I should just travel around Europe. So, you know, it's actually quite moving. And this is a patient from Germany who had 2 tumors at the same time, and she is now in university. So it's really amazing what you can see. Sorry. And the real thing is the personal note. So this is how we think together, isn't it? You have a tumor. You have to think like the geneticists, take family history and everything, but rely on your pathologists. Tell them to do testing that will tell you about cancer predisposition. For example, sequence beta-catenin, isn't it? Because you need to know if it's APC. Then it will improve. Targeted therapies for many patients that we never thought about before. Immune-directed therapy, early detection and prevention. This is a patient, Helen Chan, Michael, before we were born, that was smart and did this. And this is a patient with a dot here, which is a glioblastoma. She is now 17 years after. She's a survivor. She got 5 cancers, including colon and breast cancer that was not treated, because when you found it this big, you don't need to treat. She finished university. This is incredible, guys. And so we have to believe. And the last thing, you can improve survival, quality of life, isn't it? And affects the whole family. So this is quality of life here, and this is, of course, survival. Personal things for me as a human that lost his life for this syndrome is we learn from the patients all the time, and we learn from tumors. We now learn that even if the tumor doesn't respond initially, we sent the patient home to die, and 3 months after, we asked what's happening, because we do palliative care, and she said she's fine. So we called her back, the tumor is gone. So immunotherapy is not targeted therapy. We need to learn. There's a yin and yang. Always remember, when you find a yin, think what it means for the cancer. When you find a mutation in the cancer, see if you can trace it to the germline. Be careful of things which are similar, but you can use similar concepts as we discuss targeted therapies to learn from each other. And of course, everything must be done with international collaboration and everything. So I think I'm done. Thank you so much for listening and questions. So.
But Uri, I often use the expression that I've been Taboried, which means I've just had the effect of Uri for a few minutes and it's changed my life. And that's another example, hopefully, of all the participants in the room, that you've all been Taboried rather than tangoed, which is the old advertisement. Thank you very much for that. Can I ask you to help us in the room? A very simple biological question. I have 3 questions. First of all, biological. Why do patients with CMMRD, when in the cell cycle at the checkpoint, why does the aberration not get picked up, and why does the cell evade apoptosis? I can understand TP53
Exactly.
and the checkpoint integrity is lost, but why are these cells not being picked up and shunted into apoptosis?
I think this is such an important question, and it kills a little bit the discussion for the next session about high-grade glioma. So when we say DNA damage, defects and stuff, we need to be careful because it's like basketball and chess, isn't it? So P53RB, they are the guardians of the genome. Everything that is problematic is flagged. Their job is to find it. After signaling, tell them to. And then they are the effectors say, die. I'm just oversimplifying, okay? So if everything works well, it goes to P53 and RB. They say die to protect against mistakes. But there are multiple sensors before that's their job to find that there is a mistake. Otherwise, nobody knows about it. So for example, when you get DNA breaks, it's the homologous recombination Fanconi anemia genes, BRCA and stuff. So during the cell, 90% of the time the cell is not replicating the DNA, just having fun. If there's any damage from radiation, chemotherapy, or anything, that will be flagged to the Fanconi pathway. I'm oversimplifying, another, BR and multiple others. It will go to P53 and say die, okay? So the mismatch repair system, the beauty for us, is it's only in charge, I know it's not really true today, but only in charge of during this DNA replication to fix the mistakes. Nothing to do with what happens in the rest of the cell cycles or external. It's internal mistakes. So if this is happening, mistakes happen, they will not sense it. If they don't sense it, the cells will be very, very happy and continue to divide. Give you an example which destroys our next session, a drug called temozolomide. What temozolomide does is create mutations during the replication phase that the mismatch repair system job is to recognize, flag to P53, the cell is dying. What happens when you have no mismatch repair? Temozolomide doesn't work because it doesn't flag. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it actually creates a more hypermutant tumor, and the cells will just divide happily and become more cancerous. Is that okay? So that's the difference. Mismatch repair is only in charge of sensing and actually repairing, but also sensing to P53 mistakes during replication and not during the rest of the things in the cell cycle. That's for the biology. Is that okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Now, that's why radiation, hey, you can give them radiation, no problem, isn't it? Because it's nothing to do with that. They are very sensitive to radiation. They have no problem with their own thing, and they're just completely, it's like honey or giving, alternative therapies to these cancers because they don't care.
Yeah.
If you give temozolomide, actually 6 mercaptopurine too.
I don't want to hog the floor, but my second question is, are you proposing that we're missing a lot of patients with CMMRD, other tumors, and is it a high enough level for us to start screening all pediatric patients for CMMRD?
So this is really important, guys. CMRD is the tip of the iceberg. It's rare. Forget about it for a sec. MMRD is a cancer mechanism. Not all of them will be CMRD. The majority will be either somatic or germline or Lynch.
Yeah.
What we are missing is MMRD cancers because every country spends billions of dollars on RNA sequencing, methylation arrays, and panel, which will not determine this pan-cancer mechanism. To do that, you need to invest either in immunohistochemistry, cheap, or to do the logic assay that is just, it's very cheap. In gliomas, the guidelines in North America now, and it's going to be in the next WHO book, is that every glioma, if it's not ABC, needs to be tested for mismatch repair deficiency. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
in sarcomas, we don't know yet. But of course, you may need to think about it. So it's not CMRD. Just remember yin and yang.
Yeah.
It's two different things.
The MRD is the one. Perfect, thank you. And then finally, the success with some marginal success with Nivo and other immunotherapies in the past, could it have been a MRD type tumor rather than a checkpoint inhibitor?
That's
sensitive tumor.
That's, you mean in,
Are we missing?
childhood cancers and
Correct,
stuff?
yeah.
It's really an amazing question. So I think some of these immune-based things, it's based on concepts and not on the mechanism. So oversimplifying, it's caused by a mutation which is immunogenic because the T cell can attack, okay? Now, if you have, by chance, a very immunogenic mutation, that can be even one mutation, like in Hodgkin, sometimes they have responses. It's not to many mutations, just to a single or two which are immunogenic, okay? So, but that's rare. The more mutations you have, the better chance you have that you'll have immunogenic mutation which will activate the T cells. And that's why ultra hypermutant is better than hypermutant, which is better than melanoma, which is better. Is that okay? So we are now looking, and clinical trials are happening, to take what we call hot tumor in children that have predictive to be immunogenic, and maybe they will respond better to immune checkpoint blockade.
Perfect. Thank you.